In a world where geopolitics is, rapidly shifting and long-standing alliances are being redefined with every election cycle, Canada stands at a crossroads, one that will shape not only the future of its military capabilities but also its diplomatic standing and leverage in the escalating standoff with a belligerent and transactional United States under President Donald Trump. At the center of this dilemma lies a controversial high-tech symbol of strategic dependence, the American-made F-35 fighter jet. For some, it's the crown jewel of next-generation warfare, a stealthy marvel designed to dominate in contested airspace. For others, especially in Canada's increasingly agitated political climate, it's an expensive emblem of national subordination to a country whose president is toying with economic warfare and even rhetorical annexation. Should Prime Minister Mark Carney cancel the remainder of the $19 billion F-35 deal and pivot toward European alternatives like the Swedish Gripen, or should he hold the cards close, using the deal as leverage in what's becoming an economic and diplomatic knife fight with Washington? The answer, for now, lies not in the roar of a jet engine, but in the whispering tension of strategic patience, a kind of quiet diplomacy that doesn't play well in headlines, but often wins in the long run. Let's be clear. The F-35 is not just a fighter jet, it is a multi-billion-dollar symbol of alliance, technological dependence, and political entanglement. Developed over more than 2 decades, the F-35 Joint Strike Fighter program has drawn in dozens of nations, billions in investment, and an intricate web of supply chains and software dependencies. It was never just about air superiority. It was about shaping a post-Cold War Western military consensus. A platform as much about politics and interoperability as about combat. Canada, as a long-standing participant in the program, has already committed billions. It has received its first batch of jets and is deeply embedded in the logistical and technical ecosystem controlled largely by Lockheed Martin, the U.S. defense giant that leads the program. With U.S. ownership of critical software and operational updates tethered to Pentagon approval, Canada's sovereignty over its own Air Force capabilities is increasingly at the mercy of American discretion, and herein lies the tension. Former Foreign Minister Lloyd Axworthy, along with a growing coalition of critics, from disarmament advocates to conservative commentators, has urged Ottawa to, push back. They argue that moving forward with the F-35 purchase only deepens Canada's dependence on a partner that has, under Donald Trump's leadership, shown a willingness to, weaponize that dependence. As Axworthy put it bluntly, do we want our military so entangled with the American military that our discretion and independence of movement are limited? Their concerns are not just hypothetical. The idea of a kill switch embedded in the software that could, in theory, disable the F-35's combat capabilities isn't just conspiracy fodder, it's actually a reflection of real anxieties over digital sovereignty. The United States denies any such feature, but honestly, it doesn't change the fact that all operational updates, diagnostics, and mission software have to pass through U.S. servers and approvals. The Pentagon retains ultimate control over key functions, which means that if relations sour, access to essential upgrades or mission-critical software could be delayed or even withheld altogether. And if Trump's behavior in his first and now second presidency has proven anything, it's that he sees alliances as leverage, not commitments. Whether it's imposing tariffs on Canadian steel and aluminum, threatening NATO withdrawal, or, publicly musing about turning Canada into the 51st state, Trump has shown a pretty consistent willingness to test, bend, or outright break long-standing partnerships in pursuit of unilateral gain. This is the world in which Prime Minister Mark Carney must operate. A world where diplomacy is no longer about quiet consensus but honestly about managing chaos. So when Carney chooses to re-examine the F-35 deal rather than cancel it outright, it is not an act of political cowardice. It is honestly a calculated act of strategic delay. In the brutal terrain of high-stakes geopolitics with a volatile White House, patience is not weakness, it's survival. To cancel now without a fully coordinated alternative would be to play all of Canada's cards before the real negotiation even begins. The F-35 deal, as flawed and fraught as it may be, represents one of Canada's few high-value bargaining chips in a much broader and increasingly tense trade and sovereignty dispute. Consider this: Canada is not just buying jets, it is buying leverage. The F-35 deal represents a rare opportunity to apply diplomatic pressure, not through confrontation, but through conditional cooperation. And, in a world where Trump is threatening economic sanctions, launching new tariffs, and undermining NATO solidarity, every lever of influence matters. Europe, notably, is already reconsidering its dependency on U.S. defense systems. France, Germany, and Sweden have invested heavily in domestic alternatives like the Rafale, Eurofighter Typhoon, and Gripen E, respectively. In 2025, the European Union launched a coordinated initiative to reduce reliance on U.S. defense manufacturers, citing both security concerns and economic resilience. Portugal, another F-35 partner, has openly considered canceling its order due to similar concerns. These are not isolated acts of rebellion, they are actually signs of a broader shift in global defense thinking. Carney understands this shift. His government has already made moves in this direction, most notably the recent $6 billion radar system procurement from Australia, which is, a conscious pivot away from U.S. military technology. These decisions signal to Washington that Canada is willing to diversify its defense relationships. But pulling the plug on the F-35 now, especially without a replacement plan fully coordinated with NORAD and NATO allies, could backfire, both strategically and operationally. There's also a technical and logistical reality that critics sometimes overlook. Switching to another fighter platform, be it the Swedish Gripen or the French Rafale, would involve an enormous restructuring of Canada's training, maintenance, and operations infrastructure. The Royal Canadian Air Force has spent years preparing for F-35 integration. A sudden shift would mean 2 sets of simulators, 2 supply chains, 2 pilot training programs, and potentially billions more in long-term operating costs. In the high-stakes game of geopolitics, leverage is everything. And the F-35 deal, flawed and controversial as it may be, remains one of Canada's most potent strategic bargaining chips. To discard it prematurely would be to surrender a rare instrument of influence in an increasingly asymmetrical relationship with Washington, especially now. Donald Trump is not known for consistency. His leadership style is marked by impulse, unpredictability, and honestly, an almost pathological obsession with image and transaction. He breaks alliances, then demands loyalty. He imposes tariffs, then offers deals, always expecting submission in return. In that landscape, it is not the rational actor who wins, but the one who best understands the rules of chaos. And that makes Trump dangerous. But also, predictable in his unpredictability. He thrives on disruption, on throwing opponents off balance, on creating crises to which only he can offer a solution. In such an environment, holding firm, especially on something as symbolically and financially significant as a fighter jet contract, keeps Canada in the game. Why? Because the F-35 program isn't just a defense initiative, it's a global enterprise. It depends on international credibility, broad uptake, and the perception of reliability. Lockheed Martin's cost projections and production efficiencies are built on the assumption that NATO allies and global partners will buy in, stay in, and build their air forces around this system. If Canada, a close NORAD and NATO ally, were to publicly withdraw from the program amid tensions with the U.S., it would send a chilling message, not just to defense contractors, but to every country still debating whether the F-35 is a risk worth taking. It would undermine confidence in the program and rattle the image of cohesion that Washington works so hard to maintain. In other words, this isn't just about jets, it's about optics. And honestly, few things unnerve Trump more than the fear of a public relations debacle, especially one that makes America look isolated or economically vulnerable. There is no doubt that the Saab Gripen E and F offers some pretty compelling advantages. It's cheaper to procure, less expensive to maintain, easier to deploy from, austere environments, and it's designed with the kind of agility that really suits Canada's vast, rugged geography. For a country tasked with monitoring an immense Arctic frontier, the Gripen's flexibility is truly a tactical asset. Its lower operational cost, less than half that of the F-35, could actually free up billions in Canada's defense budget, allowing investments in long-range missile systems, Arctic surveillance infrastructure, and cyber defense capabilities. Moreover, choosing a European-built jet would be a bold symbolic statement, a declaration of independence from America's defense industrial dominance. But let's not mistake symbolism for strategy. The Gripen's rising appeal is honestly driven more by politics than by performance. It is a response to Trump's behavior, the breakdown of NATO norms, his overtures to Moscow, and his willingness to treat allies kind of like adversaries. Europe, understandably, is pivoting away from dependence on US systems. The EU's recent policy shift to invest more in domestic defense production reflects a growing determination to build a truly sovereign European defense identity. Canada's exploration of the Gripen fits into this larger recalibration. But make no mistake, the path away from American defense infrastructure is steep, slow, and lined with risk. Transitioning from the F-35 to the Gripen is, well, not as simple as changing brands. It would require rebuilding a significant portion of Canada's military infrastructure from the ground up. New training pipelines for pilots, new maintenance procedures, separate logistics chains, simulators, diagnostic systems, weapons integrations, and software protocols. This creates operational fragmentation in a defense force already stretched thin by, aging CF-18s, increasing Arctic patrols, and growing multilateral commitments. It would likely take 5 to 7 years before a full Gripen transition could even approach operational readiness at scale. And while Canada could continue to cooperate with United States-based F-35 squadrons under the NORAD umbrella, sharing radar and targeting data while rejecting the platform itself, introduces a paradox: mutual dependence without trust. That is a diplomatic and operational tightrope with no safety net. Prime Minister Mark Carney, long known for his composure under pressure, first as Governor of the Bank of Canada, then as Governor of the Bank of England, is not one to act on impulse or ideology. His instinct to delay, not cancel, the F-35 procurement reflects a deeper strategic calculus. By re-evaluating the deal publicly, but keeping it technically intact, Carney manages to project strength without provocation, align with growing nationalist sentiment without sacrificing strategic options, signal openness to European defense partnerships, and remind Washington that Canada's cooperation cannot be taken for granted. It's a masterstroke of balancing diplomacy, a position of quiet leverage rather than noisy defiance. He is speaking to multiple audiences: the Canadian public, United States policymakers, European allies, and defense contractors, without fully committing to any single irreversible path. In international relations, timing is not a detail, it is the strategy. To cancel the F-35 now, amid a volatile global landscape, would mean sacrificing one of Canada's only pressure points in trade negotiations that are expected to intensify under Trump's aggressive economic policies. It would also risk weakening military readiness at a time when threats are rising from multiple fronts, from the militarization of the Arctic to escalating instability in Eastern Europe and the Pacific. Yes, the F-35s are expensive. Yes, they are imperfect. And yes, they tie Canada closer to a partner whose reliability is now in question. But in a world where Trump trades in coercion, confusion, and confrontation, raw military hardware becomes less important than the leverage it represents. In that light, the F-35s are not just weapons, they're strategic currency, a diplomatic asset that Carney can cash in when the time is right. It's tempting to cancel the F-35 to send a message, to stand up to Trump, to symbolically reclaim sovereignty in the face of bullying. But in geopolitics, symbols don't always win wars, strategy does. Mark Carney's approach may not make headlines, it may frustrate activists and editorial boards hungry for bold decisions, but in the long game of diplomacy, restraint is often more powerful than reaction, and leverage, when played at the right moment, can shift the board entirely.